again. So if you remember from last time, we reviewed our new project. So we talked about these 4 questions. First, do you think that art mediums have boundaries? So do you think there's limit to the things that we use to create artwork with? Where do you usually find artwork at? How can materials be conventional, which is like the normal materials we use, or unconventional, which are materials that we don't typically use? And is the aspect of nature interacting with art beneficial or detrimental? So is it good or bad when nature and art are interacting with each other? We looked at Thomas Dambeau, which, if you remember, is an artist that makes these ginormous nature people out of reclaimed wood. We also looked at Andy Goldsworthy, who creates nature sculptures, and he displays them in the woods where he finds his art materials at. Then your plan was to start creating your sketches, which you should have already finished by now, or you're finishing it up today in the first 15 minutes or so. And then now we're going to be looking at what an armature is. So an armature is like the skeleton of any type of sculpture that you're creating. So for our example, we are creating an armature for our nature person. So it's the skeleton, and that's what's going to hold our nature person together and make our nature person look like a person. So just like us people need skeletons to be able to move our arms and stand up and do whatever, we need that for our sculptures as well. So here's a couple of examples of what an armature is. First, we have this armature on the left, which was made out of a clothes hanger. It's a very thin armature, and people are going to put clay over that to be able to build out their figure. On the second example we have in the middle, they're creating an animal, and their armature is made completely out of cardboard. And so they left these gaps so they can paper mache over that. You guys should fill up all of your areas. So if you're going to create an armature out of cardboard like this, it has to be all the way filled like mine is. That way it's easier to apply your materials. And then lastly, on the right, we have this frog, and this person made their armature out of tin foil and out of tape, which is a possibility for you guys as well. Remember, our nature people are only going to be a couple of inches tall and a couple of inches wide. So they're going to be pretty small. So you can think about the materials that are easiest and most accessible to you. So if you have access to old cardboard boxes from cereal or from your drink boxes or whatever, you can use that. Or if you don't have access to that, you can use tin foil to create your nature person, and you can just crunch the tin foil up to make it look like the shapes that you want it to be. So there was your quick little review of what we're talking about and what an armature is. In the next little clip, you're going to be able to see how I made my armature and what I used to make my armature. So until then, I will see you guys later.
Hello again, friends. This is the process of me building my armature. I used cardboard and a Sharpie to trace my initial size that I wanted my torso to be. And then you see that I'm taping ledges onto it. When you're taping curved edges, you can see that I initially tried to press it down. It's not the best method. So if you put your piece of tape on like that, you can take a pair of scissors and start to cut little notches. That way it lays down better. As you go through, you can feel free to tape those edges however you like, but I think that's the best method. Then you see that I built my leg, and I'm tracing out where I want my leg to sit. You can see that I go back and forth between placing my pieces up to my my torso, and I go back and trim it, and I remeasure a couple of different times to make sure that I have it exactly how I want it before I start making big cuts. I just cut the sides, that way I could place it in there, and then I'm going to tape it in. Next, you can see that I'm measuring the foot. I kind of mark out the general height that I want it to be, that way it fits the way that I want to. And then I just start sketching a random foot shape. I think of a foot as having a little ledge on the side of it, and it doesn't have to be anatomically correct. It just has to fit how you want your monster to be. After I cut my foot out, I took a piece of tape and a small piece of cardboard that was just a scrap, and I'm using that as a little ledge. That way it looks more like a foot. Then you can see that I'm taping it down and moving on to the next piece. Next, I already built the general structure for the bent leg. I just took 2 small tubes and I ended up taping them together. This isn't shown, but I did measure it up a couple of different times just to make sure that it fits correctly. Then I'm taping the knee area, and then here in a second you'll see me kind of measuring it out where I want it to be placed, and then I'm going to cut my little slit like I did for the other one and tape it in. I want you to make sure while you're going through this process, you really take your time. That way you can build your friend the exact way that you want them to look like. So for Tuna, which is my friend's name, I made sure that I measured back and forth to see if he fit the way that I was really wanting him to look. I taped my other foot on, and I didn't show this, but I did make the arms in the same process as the legs. So I just made tubes, and now I'm taping it on. Here in a second, I cut a little strip off. That way it looks like he has more of a shoulder shape. And I repeated the same process for the other arm. Now you can see here, I'm starting to visualize how I want his head to be. I made shoulders for him, and then I just traced out a general shape of what the head will look like. I also cut that out, but I wanted to make sure that his head looked proportionate to his body. So that's why I sketched it out, and I went around a couple of different times. I even adjusted my cutting after, just to make sure that he really fit the way that I wanted him to be. I then taped him in, and I'll be moving on to the next step. Around this point, I decided that he looked kind of awkward with his head laying straight down, because if you think of the way that your head lays when you're laying down, it's lifted up just a little bit. So I wanted him to have a little structure. So I decided that I was going to take a paper towel and just ball it up and tape it. That way I could attach it to the back of his head. I also did the same process for his belly. So I took a piece of paper towel and I balled it up, and then I taped it. That way he could have a big belly. I also cut out a heart and put it inside of Tuna's chest to make sure that he truly is one of my friends. I also just went back and taped everything down to make sure that it was nice and secure, and just kept working back and forth to make sure that he looked the way that I wanted him to look like.